Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. Before we get started, you should understand that this is completely impromptu, which means that everything that we say in the next 10 minutes is completely factual. That's it. Not emotionally driven at all. I think I'm going to start this out like this, all right? We're going to rant. We've got Dread on a Discord call with us. That's how you know it's going to be good. I think we've discovered that the experimental modifiers were too experimental. I think we understood like the lore accurate reason that the exiled mage in Last Epoch has been exiled, because I think his experimental modifiers are busted. Let's talk about them. Hey Dread, what's on your mind, buddy? I'm gonna go pull up some LE Tool stuff. You talk for a second.
All right, so the experimental affixes, if you don't know what they are essentially affixes on gear that can either only be dropped by the exiled mage, or they can only be made using the Glyph of Insight, which no one knows how to use unless you use a third-party program, which is the exact thing that they didn't want to start.
Exclamation point insight, by the way. Go ahead, keep going.
By the way, yeah, we're not going to get into that because that's not the point of this video. The point I want to talk about is the actual experimental mods themselves. So I think, as a concept, the experimental modifiers are an insanely good idea. Okay? So there's been a lot of problems with Last Epoch in general about there isn't enough, like, what I would call weight on your actions in terms of what affixes you put on your gear. Most of the time, you just put good affixes on your gear and you're good to go. Well, the experimental affixes, they're a pool that can't, coexist with each other, right? So they have the ability to make one-off really strong modifiers that can't interact with each other. So, like, for instance, imagine if two of the big ward modifiers can interact with each other on boots, right? But the problem is they didn't really lean into this enough. Like, for instance, it reminds me of the relic situation we got going, like the insanely powerful ward relic situation, where if EHG wants to make a really good ward relic, ward item, they just put it on the relic, and then it fights against Twisted Heart, Vessel of Strife, yada yada yada.
Yeah, right? It's actually the exact same problem as the health regeneration stuff. Because health regen, you want to go melee stuff with the Shard of the Settled Lands, but then you also want to use the relic, which is hotly contested. Yeah, okay, keep going. Totally agree.
And that's the idea, I believe, that the experimental affixes are supposed to work around, right? The problem is, there's two main problems. The first one is there is an insane bias I notice when it comes to them towards ward. I feel as though the ward ones, in comparison to the normal ones, like the endurance threshold ones, is insane. It's such a huge difference. Like the dodge and endurance threshold one versus the ward on traversal use. If you just look at the numbers and you just compare them, it's an insane difference. And it's crazy that even managed to make it in the game in that kind of state, right? And then you have stuff like the armor experimental modifier, which is mandatory on a lot of builds because damage over time in Last Epoch. That should just be an affix in general.
Mandatory on high-end builds for people who are really trying to put ethical builds, or even unethical builds if they want to push 2,000 or something. But you get to a point in the end game of Last Epoch, we talked to lots of people who are pushing really far, that the damage over time that they encounter from enemies at really high corruption seems to just scale so much harder than anything else does because their defenses don't scale along with it. Yeah, so dot mitigation, we've complained about it a lot in the past. I love that it's an experimental modifier. I love that it's in the game. I love that there's more sources of it. I guess I'm okay that it's an experimental modifier, but you just said that it'd be okay as an other modifier as well. So we have the dodge one. With the dodge one. What's the dodge one? Let me pull it up real quick. Experimental Frenzy dodge.
It gives you some flat dodge chance and then endurance threshold if you haven't been hit recently.
Yeah, endurance threshold if you've not been hit recently, which I love. I think it's a really good use of endurance threshold. Endurance threshold as a modifier by itself tends to fall behind unless it has super inflated values, because health generally scales better than endurance threshold does. We can talk about that at length, but we're going to skip it. So this modifier, I know, Dread, you and I love the endurance threshold stuff that's in Falconer. It says percent health gained is extra endurance threshold if you haven't been hit recently, which like ties into your dodge-based defense. It's so cool. And even gaining health, percentage of maximum health as endurance threshold, that's a really cool, interesting mechanic. It's a payoff for building life instead of payoff for building life instead of building ward. It comes on hide skin in Druid. It comes in the new the new Acolyte body armor implicit has the same thing going on, which is great. Love that kind of thing. So endurance threshold, when it gets tied to other stuff, very cool. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about shit that's bad. What? It occurs to me, and you just said it right there. It's like a bias toward ward. It seems like the ward related stuff is so much better than the dodge stuff. The dodge one is good. The dodge one's cool. I would love the dodge one. They could double the value. They could. I mean, it's pre-balanced, but I love that it's in the game. But the ward one, I said at the beginning of this video that I think that I think we know why the exiled mage was exiled. It's because the three of, not all of the problematic things, but three of the very problematic things in Last Epoch right now are experimental modifiers. So let's talk about those. What's number one? What's the first one you want to rant about? It's got to be the first one, right?
It's the experimental ward gained on traversal use. Now, it's funny because in a vacuum, without the game being dumb, okay, this one's actually not that bad. Like, imagine you're playing a rogue and you're running double smoke weaver and you get to like 600 mana and you delete all your mana, and then every single time you use like, you know, smoke weaver, you get like 700 ward or whatever. That sounds balanced, right?
That's
that
cool. You heavily invest into it. You're doing it ethically. There's no bullshit going on. Yeah, you work for it. You get the payoff. Done.
Yeah, and these are balanced around the fact that traversal skills have a cooldown. I don't know if you're familiar with the Shield Rush build that I talked about.
I am familiar with the Shield Rush build that consumes a bunch of mana and that it instantly refunds it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that build is a traversal tag skill, which shouldn't have the traversal tag, by the way, if you take off the movement on it, you know, whatever, right, with the node. Like, that should be fixed just by taking off the traversal tag, obviously, right? No, like, obviously. But the other problem with the experimental ward gained on traversal skill use is the fact that for some reason, we don't know why, but these missing mana things work with negative mana. Like, it feels so out of place and out of, like, it shouldn't exist. This shouldn't be a thing. You shouldn't be gaining benefits for mana you don't have. Maybe it should scale up to your max mana. Like, if you go to negative 600 mana while you have 600 mana, maybe it should work then. But I don't know why you should be able to get to negative.
Completely uncapped.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's like
but before I yoinked you into Discord to talk with me, I was making fun of someone in Twitch chat who made the terrible choice of playing a non-broken build. so Mao is our resident Lich expert. He's been playing Lich since like the Dark Ages, and he made the mistake of playing a build that doesn't have a bug in it. So he only has 984 waves in the arena, and someone popped onto Reddit, you know, a week ago or so, and they're like, I'm finally ready to unveil my build now that I've got 1600 waves in the arena. And the build looks really cool, and it's awesome, and it's really well put together, and it's got good ideas. Oh, it's just more bullshit. Okay, so it's totally just this. It's consuming mana with the two-handed unique axe for harvest. It's going incredibly negative mana, and then every 3 seconds, it uses a traversal skill that doesn't cost mana. So that it just gains 40,000 ward every 3 seconds. That's
we had this problem before. Like this, like the thing is, they nerfed the other part of the build, the old version with the zombie potion, which, by the way, is still insanely strong. But they nerfed the other version where you use zombies to get into insane negative mana with sacrifice, right? Sacrifice used to be able to spend mana even though you didn't have mana, right? Just like the U.S. Treasury. And the problem is with with that was you were able to get to like negative 40k mana and all that, and you're able to use this
generate literally 6 million ward. Yeah, cool.
Now if those builds, if the mana missing didn't work with negative mana,
or if it
then
only
all of
worked
a
up to 100% of your maximum mana, so like 600, you can go to like negative 600.
Yeah, then they could be at negative 50 billion mana, and they would be fine.
Isn't it weird how we're talking about what if they just put a cap on it? It's like it's a very common conversation these days talking about.
Well, it's so weird because they won't cap this, but they'll cap like the summon bear node that like gives you like 20% more damage with bleed or whatever, right? Like based on like they'll cap that.
Like
very weird.
Let me jump through hoops and do bad things. But like this, there's so many abuse cases for this negative mana stuff. And like negative mana is cool. It is interesting. It's a distinguishing factor that sets Last Epoch apart from other. But if this bullshit keeps happening, maybe we should address it in some way. Maybe there should be some kind of overhaul that goes along with it. Let's talk about another one.
Yeah.
The second one
talk
here.
About the zombie one.
Yeah. You know what? We just mentioned the zombie one. So I'm going to put it up on the screen here. So like zombie one, number 2, let's go zombie belt. I call this zombie potion, zombie belt, zombie thing. And so
I thought this build was dead, by the way.
Oh, it's not dead.
Apparently it wasn't.
No, I'm going to pull it up on LE Tools so people can see it.
Essentially, what was supposed to happen was they were supposed to make it so that whenever you summon zombies through the potion belt, right, and you wouldn't summon like the big zombies. And the problem is like that wasn't really like the thing that was making it broken. The thing that was making it broken is because you can go to like Merchant's Guild now and buy a 2LP like Jungle Queen, and all of a sudden you can like spam the potion 15 times, and all of a sudden, oops, Jurla's dead. Oops, that 1000 corruption boss is dead. And the thing is, potions are in such a weird spot because I remember the day, like, let me go get my cane out and like get my my cane medicine here. I remember a day where they removed the dodge on potion use, like affix on belts, because they didn't want potions to be a thing. They didn't want it to be a end game thing.
They're okay with a little bit of it.
Focus on end game.
They have potion synergy in Forge Guard. They have potion synergy.
Yeah,
you gain some extra defense when you're a lich.
But you have that.
Yeah,
so and then you have this, and then you have this.
This is cast speed based on how fast you can slam your potions. It's absurd.
Yeah, and I think that like the biggest problem with this is it's an experimental app. Like, sure, it has its uses outside of Acolyte. Like, you can technically use it, let's be real. But outside of Acolyte, this is kind of just worthless other than the % damage. So that's actually another thing that I have a problem with the experimental affixes, is the ones that we have problems with are just insanely niche for absolutely no reason. Like, for instance, one of the experimental affixes that I have no problem with currently is like the experimental armor applies to damage over time. I'm not against that at all.
It's just
because
good.
It's just generically good, and it's an interesting effect. But then you have something like the zombie potion. You're just like, imagine you're like trying to craft your belt and you hit the zombie affix, right, with the stupid Glyph of Insight, and you're not even playing that build. It's like, it feels like garbage, right? And like the same thing could be said about the experimental ward per missing health. That one's like insanely niche and really strong. It turns out, who would have thought? But like, that's like the problem is like all of the, like, for some reason, and this seems to happen over and over and over again, all of the quote unquote good experimental affixes are all based on ward. Look at that. Like, for instance, no one's ever going to complain if you have 60% frenzy effect and 4 seconds of frenzy.
That's cool.
No one's ever going to complain about like experimental haste effect. Like, even the mana gained on potion used is not overpowered. It's just interesting. Like, you can use it with Elico's Abandon. You can use it like that one's interesting too. Like, it's not overpowered because it's based on potions. If you get this on a Jungle Queen Valley, that would be like a cool build. It wouldn't be
It's not overpowered because it's based on potions. It's like, whoa, we did just complain about the other potion thing that's cast based on potions.
Well, the problem is that it's giving you mana. Volatile Zombie is giving you like 7 times that mana in effective value. Okay, like, like it does eventually go overboard. And Like the minion transport with traversal skills, that's like one of the best of them.
It's
in terms
wonderful.
of design.
It's
Like it's
excellent
such a good
quality of life
idea.
too.
Yeah, it was like something we've been complaining about forever for
Yeah.
4 years. Like that was a good experimental affix.
Uh-huh.
But I think the problem with, like I said, the experimental affixes is if they are going to be niche, like they are, there needs to be like 5 times of them. Like if they're going to be niche, I don't mind there being a smorgasbord, but when they're incredibly niche and half of them are useless except on very, very, very specific builds, like there's this entire mechanic revolving around exiled mages and all these fancy affixes, and all we ever hear from it is, "Oh look, I just summoned 60 zombies in 0.2 seconds."
All right, let me
I
interrupt
gained like
because I
Yes.
have a comparison, a parallel to a different video game where this argument came up, and there was something introduced in this game where it was very niche and it pigeonholed all of the meta choices into these niche silos. And one of the arguments was, I don't mind how strong the silos are, but like if they're going to be so niche, we need more of them, because that would be interesting, because then I could find out which one fits the thing that I'm particularly trying to do. And what happened in that game is they just banned them all together, so now you can't use them. I guess. Wait, did they ban them all? They did. They banned them in the standard environment, but they're still playable in Legacy and Vintage. So I'm talking about Magic the Gathering. We're talking about the companions that you can use. Things like things like Luris. Do you remember that? It was like, oh man, this is the dark ages of Magic the Gathering, because there's only 2 good companions and you have to use one of those. So it warped the rest of your creativity, your deck building decisions around those. It's like, well, if they're going to be niche, yeah, they're OP. One answer is just to nix them and delete them altogether, which is what they did basically for the standard environment. Or what they could have done is they could have designed 20 more of them and just, maybe that's the new Magic the Gathering. Maybe there's like an entire new format called Commander where, that's what you have, right? So if you have so many of them, it kind of works out. It kind of balances itself. But only having 2 or 3 that are giga strong really warps what's going on. I want to talk about the third strong one here. I'm positive that you and I are on the same page. So why don't you tell me what the third strongest?
The experimental ward per missing health.
Fuck experiment. Okay, so I made a YouTube video. I'm gonna call this ward per health, like this, ward per HP.
Well, my problem is like, these are supposed to be interesting affixes that are like different and wacky.
This isn't interesting. This is just more of the same.
It's just more of what
it's just more of the same. So I made a YouTube video.
By the way.
What's that?
Which we didn't need, by the way. Those builds did not need this.
I made a YouTube video talking about Exsanguinous, and if you want to see a video that didn't age well, Twitch chat, take a look at this. Exsanguinous. I can spell, I promise. And I did this like video essay talking about the history of Ward and what Ward-based builds and low-light builds and Exsanguinous, what those things all looked like in last Epoch. And my point was, Exsanguinous is not a good item. And I was sick and tired of seeing people on Reddit say, wow, I found an Exsanguinous. I'm so happy I finally have this chase item that's completely useless. And it's like, you need to understand that this item's not good. But now that we have a critical mass of things that give ward, like we have the boots and the Exsanguinous, and also this tier 7 goes up to 20%. And also we have more ward synergies in the game, and also we have Warlock, and also we have, these things, like even if they had like a tiny bit of synergy, now they even have more.
Let's be real, the cleaver.
And Cleaver Solution, yeah. But like Blade Dancer was niche in the past, but like it was good, it was niche, it was really high end, but now it's like meta. And you had like something like the Falconer has this node that like gives you health based on how much missing health you have. You can convert that to ward. That would be an interesting thing that you could do. But nowadays, like you look at all the top tier min-maxed versions of Falconers, and they're all low life because you can use this. You can use all three of these items, the two uniques and this, and then you can use that as well. And that's enough synergy to give you just like a better play style than what you get on HP build. HP build. Because like, look what you have on HP. On HP, you get this dodge, the dodge one over here.
Ooh,
like this is your experimental affix payoff for being life based. Why the dodge?
I think my problem with the ward versus the experimental affixes is I think EHG think that like ward is some like interesting niche thing that like you can do if you want. It's like cool and wacky and stuff like that. But the problem is,
I would believe you if you told me that they thought that a long time ago. There's no way they think that right now.
Well, I mean, that's how you view these experimental affixes, is because if you view it through that lens, a lot of these experimental affixes make sense, and why there aren't any HP ones or anything is like HP is supposed to be the good solid thing, but you can do these wacky ward things on the side for fun, right? And you know, in the current state of the game, that's definitely not the case. Yeah, like I feel like as though the experimental affixes are a product of them trying to make a system without having enough time to flesh it out, which is weird because it seems like they spent more time on trying to tell you how to craft with the affixes, with the glyphs of insight, than the actual design of the affixes themselves. Like, for instance, like if you are unaware, and I'm sure Perry will link this in the description of this video, Glyph of Insight is one of the most confusing things of all time. And like the problem becomes with this is Glyph of Insight is cool and all, but it's not even the end game of what you want to do with experimental items. Because if you have a good experimental item, you cannot craft a T6, T7 without a glyph of insight, right? You can't, I believe. Like
you are correct. You cannot do that.
You can't. Okay, cool. I just making sure. And the problem is, well, my best in slot is going to come from a T7 drop or whatever, right? So they spent all this time on this crafting system that nobody wanted, by the way. We didn't want like Glyphs of Insight to be this complicated. Like the weird ironic thing here is like last Epoch, the reason why they have the loot filter in game and all that and all this and all that is out of the the reasoning behind like, hey, we want everything to be in game. We don't want you to use like third-party websites to do all this stuff, which was fine and dandy for the first few years, and then they make the Glyph of Insight system, and I'm like,
you know what's interesting with the Glyph of Insight system? So like, yes. You're right. So like, if you're using experimental affix, then you want an exalted one because you can get an exalted one, and why wouldn't you use the exalted one? But Healing Hands, which is going to be nerfed. Thank God. Healing Hands only cares about having this word of text, having this line of text. And even if you only have a tier 1 affix of this line of text, you're still good to go. So using a Glyph of Insight to put ward per HP on a pair of gloves where you already have tier 7 cast speed, it's pretty relevant. And that's like the one use case. I don't know what else you'd use it for.
I think the rework that the experimental affixes could have is the same kind of thing that the class affixes have. You know how like when you put out a class affix, the T1 version is the best version, and then as you add more, there's diminishing returns for the most part, for most of them, right?
Okay, yeah.
I feel like the experimental affixes should be like that, right? Like for instance, the first tier of the experimental missing ward as health mod should be like 10%. And as you get tiers, it doesn't add to it. It just gives you like ward decay threshold or something, right? As a flat value. Like stuff like that. Like for instance, the T1 of the minion one is like teleport 4 minions and it scales up to 6 after tier 7 or something. And then same thing with the zombie potion belt and all that. I think that would fix a lot of the problems, because another one of the biggest problems is like, if anyone's ever actually tried to farm for a T7 experimental affix, it is a pain in the ass.
For people who are trying to farm these, the best way to farm them ends up being the best way to farm a Mad Alchemist ladle as well, which is something that I personally hate doing, but it is the correct thing to do. So just 10-second rundown. The best thing to do is to find a monolith, find an echo in your monolith that has the name of John's alcove or something like that. You find like the name of a place that's like very small. It's a very small area, and potentially it has a spawn of the exiled mage right next to where you, the character, spawn. And then like you load in, you look for him, he's not there, you leave, you reset, and you literally just do that over and over and over, and you farm for like an hour or two, and that's how you get your 2 and 3 LP Mad Alchemist ladles, and that's how you get your tier 7 stuff. That's just, I hate it. It's so one-dimensional, but that's the best thing to do
like,
if you're in the market for it.
The way it should work, if they're gonna spend all this time on the insight stuff, that should be the way of getting the tier 7s. That should be
the insights. Yeah.
It should be totally the opposite way around, right? Like you should be rewarded for investing into the mechanic, which you are currently not, by the way.
You should be rewarded for engaging in the system. Yeah.
So to sum it all up in a quick, concise thing, if experimental affixes are going to be niche and really strong, there needs to be more of them, or they need to not be as strong. Okay, those are like the first thing. The second thing, acquiring them shouldn't be so pain in the ass currently. Either do what I said about the making it so that the glyph of insight gets you to the tier 7s. Maybe relook at the mechanic or something like that. Like a cool way of fixing it would be like if you use a glyph of insight on it and you like use a glyph of insight on an affix, it pops up with 3 choices, right? And you get to choose one of those choices and it's just random. So there's a little bit of RNG to it, but at least then you have some kind of like it's in game, it's a UI that pops up. It's not like I have to go to a fucking third-party website just to figure out how it works, right? And then the third problem with them is we don't like, obviously this is like in regards to like ward in general, but if they're going to be niche and strong, there needs to be a bunch of them for different archetypes and not just a bunch of ward ones, right? Or like ones like the zombie belt one, which like is just good for acolyte and that's it. Like if like for instance, imagine if there was a experimental mod that summoned 5 thorn totems when you use a potion. That would be cool, right? Then at least then like sure I could like sure there's the zombie one, but there's also the thorn totem one and yada yada yada, right? There's more interesting ones. Like imagine if there was one that just said summon 5 forged weapons.
I was gonna say that'd be awesome. What if you could get forged weapons? Oh, that'd be so cool. Wow.
Yeah, and that's like the thing is like the system itself is fine. They just didn't spend enough time on it. Like they didn't make enough of them. And in the future, if we get more experimental affixes, it's fine. But like I wouldn't mind if the pool was doubled to tripled and maybe stay away from the ward for a little bit and make some more interesting ones. But like, yeah, because like all the ward ones, all they say is just you get more ward. At least the zombie potion in the armor experimental one is like a little interesting, right?
Yeah. I want more of them. I want to continue engaging with the system in new ways. Like if these were experimental affixes, are they experimental in name only, or are these experimental because EHD tossed them into the game without really knowing what was going on? Like, I'm kind of curious about the out of game lore for the word experimental, because like I want to know, are these going to change? Are we going to get more of them? Are there going to be more exiled mages that appear in game at some point? Is there going to be an exiled acolyte that introduces more stuff into the game?
That's originally what I thought was going to be the case.
Yeah,
That's
me too. Me too.
Be the case. Yeah.
Right.
I was kind of sad when I saw that.
All right. So if you're pushing in the arena, just make sure you're using a build that can do more than 1,000 waves, and generates 40,000 ward every 3 seconds. Yeah, that's
Easy.
the takeaway. That's it.
Yeah.
No notes. Great. I'll talk to you next time. All right.
Yep. See ya.